Hello, everybody. Welcome to Inklusiiv Talks. My name is Vikas Gurung, and I will be hosting the event today. First of all, it's really amazing to see such a large crowd early this morning. We had close to 250 registrations, so we are extremely excited for the event today. This is the second Inklusiiv Talks event of the year, and the topic for today is taking actions on diversity, equity, and inclusion, the role of data. Now, let's look at the agenda. So today, we will present the results from Inklusiiv's annual survey. Then we will have the panel discussion on the role of DEI data and the key actions companies need to take to build better workplaces. Among us today, we have Laura Smith, DEI analyst and researcher, Heidi Peck, Head of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at Futurize, Thomas Nystrom, Country Manager, Managing Director at Accenture, and Stephen Lee, Communication Strategy Director at San Francisco OU, who will also be moderating the panel. A bit about the practicalities. The duration of the event is 1 hour, and it will be recorded. During the event, we encourage everyone to be active and exchange ideas about the topic on the chat box. And you can also use the Q&A function to write your questions to our panelists. We have about 10 minutes of Q&A at the end of the panel discussion, and we'll try to go through as many questions as possible. If you're going to share your thoughts about today's event on the social media channels, remember to use the hashtag InklusiveTalks while doing so. And before I start the survey report overall, at this point, I really want to give a special shout out to our volunteer community members for helping to plan and sort of set up this event overall, especially Anna, Elise, and Nelly, Vesmith, and Jama. Thank you very much. All right, let's start the session with the report. State of Diversity and Inclusion in Finland, 2020. Let's have a look at the contents first. First, we will start with the background about the survey, the goals and the reasons behind it. Then we will look into the key data and figures on demographic metrics we asked in the survey, for example, industry, age, gender, and nationality. Then we will also present the 5 key findings from the survey. And lastly, briefly about 4 different D&I stages and the distribution among the respondent companies in general. But before that, a bit about the organization behind the report. If you're hearing about us or joining us for the first time, we are Inklusiiv, fairly new organization founded in 2019 with a mission to make the diversity and knowledge accessible to everybody and support organization to transform that knowledge into action. So in our community, we share knowledge and best practices, conduct research, surveys like the annual survey, organize events like the Inklusiiv Talks, and also carry out different projects and campaigns on diversity and inclusion. Quite many supporting members already in our community, and the numbers are increasing. And on the right-hand side, you can see the mission and vision that we have. And apart from that, also our values, that is continuous learning, inclusion, and courage. Now, about the survey. Inklusiiv's annual survey is challenging each year fast-growing companies in Finland to report on their diversity and inclusion efforts. First launched in April 2019, to promoting diversity and inclusion in Finnish companies. So it was only for the tech companies with 50 plus employees and 50 million plus revenue. A total of 17 companies took part in the survey back in 2019. In 2021, though, we wanted to make the survey a bit bigger. So we reached out to companies based in Finland with a goal to increase country-specific knowledge about the state of D&I, as there has not been much data available around the topic in Finland. And of course, apart from that, in the long-term, goal is also use the available data and knowledge and help companies become more inclusive and understand its benefits. So even though it was meant for companies over 20 plus employees, we had smaller companies also answering the survey. So a total of 75 companies answered the survey, and we are using the data of only 60 companies that had 20 plus employees based in Finland. At this point, again, really want to thank all the 75 companies that took part in the survey. It definitely wouldn't have been possible without your support. So thank you very much for that. Now, let's break down the data. Firstly, let's look into the key data and figures on demographic metrics that we asked on the survey. Like I said, industry, age, gender, and nationality. Industry distribution, as you can see on the chart, we had respondents from diverse industries. The information and communication industry had the most respondents with 38%, so totaling about 23 out of 60 companies, followed by industries based on professional, scientific, and technical activities, around 13 of them. And industries in the survey were classified according to the standard industry classification 2008 from Statistics Finland. Here is the general demographics from the data that we collected on employees, their gender, and employees based in Finland, their gender, age, and nationality. In the brackets, you can see the numbers from 2019 survey. Please remember that in 2019, it was only for the tech companies with 50 plus employees or 50 million plus revenue. But this year, it was open for all the companies based in Finland with 20 plus employees. So the numbers do not directly correlate, but it is there for relevance. Some key numbers that I wanted to highlight: men still hold the majority of the workforce. We can see quite a big gender gap in information and communication industry, and this industry also happens to be the one with the most respondents. So still a lot of work to do to promote more women and more minorities in tech-related fields. Adult population that is 55 plus still active in the workforce, and they account for almost 11%. And the average amount of nationalities in the survey was 19. And other demographic measures like education, language, length of employment, ethnicity were something measured by some of the respondent companies. So from the data we collected, we put together 5 key findings. Starting with the first one, Finnish companies still favor more traditional D&I actions. When we say about traditional actions, we're talking about actions that are common and other things companies have been doing it for a long time. So on the survey, for example, employee engagement survey, which measures the degree to which employees feel valued at the company, 86% of the total respondents. We go with code of conduct, 74% have created a code of conduct. So code of conduct usually is a set of rules that outlines the norms and responsibilities or proper practices of an organization. Then 64% of the total respondents are measuring diversity demographics in the company. The second one, measuring and setting goal is not yet a routine. There is a saying, what gets measured gets done. So measuring and setting goals on diversity and inclusion can be extremely helpful. So it helps organizations to identify risk areas, prioritize the needed initiatives, assign accountability to the relevant people or relevant groups for that matter, and also overall measure the impact of the initiative. So what do we have from the survey? We found some variations on the responses. As you can see on the slide, 50% measure employee inclusion or belonging, 38% are measuring recruiting, candidate diversity, 36% have D&I goals, measures at place. And at this point, it should be remembered that inclusion creates employee engagement and a sense of belonging. And growing amount of research have indicated that diverse and inclusive teams perform very well. So therefore, for organizations, measuring and setting goals are extremely important. Firstly, to find out the overall situation, of course, followed by identifying the area where the improvements or modifications are needed. And finally, the actions needed to be taken to achieve those changes. The third one, trainings, policies, and plans are emerging. What do we mean by that? These trainings policies, and plans related to diversity and inclusion helps organizations and employees to become more aware of their own unconscious bias, and also help them to foster higher degrees of engagement and also productivity. As you can see on the slide, 45% have provided trainings on D&I to their employees or managers. 41% have created diversity inclusion policy, and 47% have D&I strategy or action plan in practice. Some of the examples mentioned by the respondents were inclusive leadership trainings, unconscious bias trainings, and also having the policies in place to further develop D&I initiatives within the company. The fourth one, companies have not yet realized the potential and the importance of employee resource groups, ERGs, and appointing someone as a head of D&I. So employee resource groups are voluntary, employee-led groups that are formed to sort of foster a diverse and inclusive workplace, which aligns with organizations' mission, values, goals, business practices, and objectives, and all the other operations. So even though diversity, we say that diversity inclusion is everybody's responsibility, but it has to be noted that actions cannot be taken if someone is not in charge. So it is always good if there is someone or some groups within the organizations who are responsible for implementing policies, practices, and really bringing up that diverse perspectives and kind of fostering an inclusive culture. So with the data, what we have with the survey, 14% had appointed head of D&I, 12% had ERGs, and apart from that, some respondent companies have also sort of formed various other groups that you can see that are listed on the right-hand side of the slide. And these are indeed, great initiatives. But having said that, the leadership positions play an important role in creating inclusive culture, and also getting leadership buy-in and commitment is probably the most critical aspect of this D&I journey. So it's very important that the leadership backs the D&I initiatives, sets the tone, and makes D&I as a strategic priority. Now, the final one, the fifth key finding that we have is hiring initiatives are not as common as you might think. So what does the number look like? According to the survey, 33% of the respondents have already started hiring initiatives around D&I. For example, anonymous recruiting, inclusive hiring practices, promoting gender-neutral job ads. So things have already been in place. And there was a saying, or it is said that a company is only as good as their employees. So it is really important that a great deal of time, energy, resources should be dedicated to hiring the right individuals for the company. And with better hiring initiatives, the hiring team can create a more inclusive process and sort of attract and retain diverse talents in this competitive market. Here's the overall distribution of the D&I actions implemented by respondent companies in 2020. As you can see on the slide, a lot of actions have already been taken so far. Employee engagement survey, code of conduct, measuring diversity and demographics being some of the most common actions taken by the respondent companies in 2020. Then a brief look at 4 different D&I stages and the distribution among the respondent companies in general. So in the survey, what we did was that we asked respondents or the companies about their own view regarding their own D&I journey and where they stand in this, mentioned stages from 1 to 4. As you can see, 10% of the companies are yet to have D&I actions, or they have thought about it. They have thought about it at some point, but no concrete actions have been taken. But possibly the most positive outcome of the overall survey or overall report is that, in general, majority of the companies, 90% per report, irrespective of their stage, whether they are in stage 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, irrespective of their stage, they are starting to understand the importance of diversity and inclusion, and they have started to take some actions to advance them. Finally, to sum it up, these were the 5 key findings. Out of those 5 points, just wanted to highlight the fourth one, again, that regarding the D&I responsibles, apart from the ERCs, employee resource groups, and appointing D&I heads, the leadership position possibly play the most important role in creating an inclusive culture and getting, that leadership buy-in and commitment is most critical aspect for any company in the D&I journey. So to conclude, this finding really, so the findings from the annual survey really shows that companies are starting to realize the value of D&I as a strategic tool, and they are committed to make the needed changes or necessary changes to advance their D&I initiatives. And throughout the process, it is very, very important to sort of like view the diversity and inclusion as a journey, not a destination. And we, as Inklusiiv, are here to help them on their journey. That's all we had for today regarding the annual survey report. At this point, again, really want to emphasize the survey wouldn't have been possible without the support of all the respondent companies, Inklusiiv community, and everyone else who have been actively, spreading the words about the survey. So thank you everyone for it, and please feel free to reach out to us should you have any questions regarding the survey findings. Now, moving on to the panel discussion. We have today Laura Smith, Thomas Nyström, Heidi Peck, and Stephen Lee, and he will be moderating the panel. Really excited from a personal view about this, and really looking forward to sort of hearing more about the important topic from the experts. Steve, this stage is yours at this point.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. It's great to see everyone. Can everyone hear? If my panelists could come online and show yourselves.
Good morning.
Thanks, guys.
Good morning.
Great to see you all.
Good morning.
All right, so I am super excited about this because I'm a nerd, and little time has been given to the idea of data and something that I super care about, which is inclusivity and actually its application to real business. So I want to make a short introduction to each of these great panelists that we have today. But myself, I'm Steve Lee. I work as the head, or the person responsible for communications strategy here at San Francisco, and San Francisco in Helsinki, not in San Francisco. Although I am American and I have been here for about 22 years. Also here is Heidi Peck. I have been had the great opportunity of knowing her even before she was only doing inclusion and diversity stuff at Future Ice. But I think she's really found her passion in what she's been doing. She's been working in all kinds of HR roles for the last 15 years. And she's had all kinds of different situations where she's been in banking and pharmaceuticals and not-for-profit. So I mean, a huge opportunity. But the one thing I didn't know about her is that she actually has a degree in broadcast journalism.
Yes.
from the UK. So that'll be really super interesting. Then we have Laura Smith, who is a researcher and communications director, and she's an advocate for inclusion. And she is a person who is deeply into the metrics as a researcher. She's into the OKRs, for those of you who know objectives and key results. And she has been helping all kinds of companies scale up and really get the understanding of diversity and inclusion within their organizations. And if you need an assessment of how well your company is doing with regards to these things, Laura is the person that you want to talk to. And she used to go to Stanford people. She doesn't ever say it, but she's got a graduate degree from Stanford. So that means she's really highbrow. She really has it going on. All right. But she's also from Detroit, and I used to spend some time there. So fellow American, Laura, thank you for coming. And then finally, we have Thomas Nunstrom. Now Accenture, of course, everybody knows Accenture as a company. Very rarely do we have people who have been with a company since 1997. This guy has seen the ins and outs of this company. He is now the managing director of Accenture Finland, the country managing director. And he's had all kinds of different global roles, specifically in technology practice. And he also leads the global architecture for Accenture's technology and cloud first division in the Nordics. So, I mean, Thomas comes to the table with all kinds of real experience and deep experience with a lot of big companies. And so we want to tap into that today to understand why this is super important for both big and small companies today. So let's get started. I want to start by asking Laura a question. We have this understanding about how data, because remember today, we're really trying to talk about data and how it applies to us doing a better job of having inclusivity and diversity work. But maybe you could give us a little bit of understanding how data applies to diversity, inclusion, and equity, and especially the measurement of equity, because I think a lot of people don't understand that completely.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I love kind of following up from the survey that Inklusiiv just did, because it shows that a lot of companies are measuring something. And that's important. They're looking at engagement, they're doing surveys on that. They are measuring demographics and these sorts of things. But I really want to make certain people think about measuring and measurement and data as not just tick box exercises, not just like checking off these things of you do this and great and that's it. I want people to actually look at measuring and collecting data that's about the impact of the actions, okay? So a lot of companies, they think that they get some data, they get some information, but the problem is they don't actually have insight from that information. And you have to think about the purpose of why you're collecting that data, or what that data is going to be used to try to interpret. And that helps you pick the right thing. So if you're looking at, for instance, you have surveys, people really want to use surveys for a lot of things. That's not bad for belonging, because belonging is looking at feeling. It's looking at how people feel in that organization. They're looking at whether or not they kind of have that ownership in that organization. That's great. But, you can also use interviews, you can use group discussions, and that's going to be just actually, to be honest, a bit more rich in data for that topic. If you're looking at diversity, you don't have to survey that. That's actually something that you can use your HR data for, okay? So instead of burning people out or losing attention, constantly tossing out surveys and things like this, you can collect data that's already there. You can reprocess, analyze the data you have in that sense. Inclusion, that's something you want to think about. Okay, well, how are people actually in the organization? So not just the presence, but think about how are they in there? What are they doing? Are they plugged in and empowered in the organization? Okay. Surveys can give you some starting information, but you want to think about processes and behavior at that point. You want to start measuring that. Communications is a great tool to look at that organizational network analyses. That's an important thing, because if you just ask people things like, hey, do you feel included? Firstly, you don't know what the definition of inclusion is that they're talking about. There are, from my research in the past 2 years, over 78 different definitions of inclusion. And then you also people don't often have full awareness of how included or excluded they are. People don't know the conversations they're not a part of all the time. People don't know, the back channeling that they're not privy to all of the time. So they don't have full understanding. So you have to understand that sometimes looking at processes and behavior is a better, informant in that sense. Equity, you want to look at policy and the impacts. So from that side, you're going to look at relational and predictive models. You're going to look at outcomes at that point, okay? So there are different things that you're looking at: diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging. And based off of what you're trying to learn, you're going to look at different tools. You're going to start looking at different kind of ways of collecting data to get there.
That is really important. We're going to come back to some of those things. You know, you talked about some of these key practices. I know that Futurize has actually implemented some of these things in your time, Haiti, as part of this. What do you think the biggest points of data that have been driving Futurize's DEI efforts? I mean, what do you think got you on this path in the first place of doing DEI as a practical activity within the strategy of your company?
So we had a group of people who were really passionate about this topic, and they were the ones who kicked off the talks and also involved the top leadership from the very beginning. But the feeling was that, okay, maybe there's something that we should be better at in terms of inclusion, but we did not really know what that was. So what we did was that we arranged a D&I audit, and to kind of build on to Laura's point, the audit, it was a massive survey, took 20 minutes for me to fill the survey. But on top of the survey, there were interviews. So people were extended an invitation to participate in an interview about the topic, where they were able to talk about their personal experiences in terms of inclusion or lack of. And this was done with an external expert. So all this was anonymous, and to this day we don't know who were interviewed. And we also did not get the raw data, but we did get like a 80-page report on the findings and the analysis, and that helped us to kind of find out where are the pain points for the organization, like where are we failing, and what groups of people are we failing? Where should we really focus the kind of our attention to in terms of improving the experience for those groups?
Okay, well, you know, and now, like in a practical situation, it seems like, did you find something that was, you know, how did you use that to help you then at that point?
Yes, we did find places where we need to improve, and some of them were things that we need to focus on internally and fix some internal things and structures and our own biases in some of our structures. But also we found that part of this is to do with our business and our clients. And actually we realized that it's also a way of making better business. So we had a client, a long-standing client, with whom we had a very trusty relationship with. And so we are a consulting company. So this client was starting a new project, and they asked for a proposal from us for the project. And they specify, okay, these are the skills that we need from the project team, and there was developers and designers that they needed for this project. And one of the requirements from the client was that the project team members should speak Finnish. And at this point, we were kind of comparing their requirements and our people, and we realized that we have a spot-on person to do one of the developer roles there, except they did not speak Finnish. So because we had that close relationship with the client, we were able to go back to them and in a positive way challenge them on this language question, and ask like, okay, would you be willing to try to take this person into the project team, even though they do not speak Finnish? Like they fulfill all your other boxes, like they have your React or whatever the language was, the coding language was that was needed to be spoken. And the customer was willing to take this risk with us, and they were very happy with the end result, and the project was successful. And this happened, I think, a couple of years ago, and ever since, with this same client, they're still a very important client to us. Ever since, they have been happy to have in that project team a non-Finnish speaking developers as part of our project team.
You know, it sounds like it's always really funny when you hear these stories of people missing out on something because they didn't include a diverse group of people. Thomas, you know, I know that I mean, Accenture's a huge company, and a lot of these things are, I guess you guys are collecting data on a regular basis about these things. What when it comes to data and inclusion and the measurement inside a company like yours, what are you guys actually looking at with regards to data inclusion, and why have you found it to be important?
So it's diversity is a multi-dimensional topic, right? And I'll just give you an example. So I had a leadership team on a Nordic level a few years ago, people who I knew very well, and we got along very well, right? So it was a really nice team to work in. And then we have this rolled out this new tool to collect insights on what kind of person are you, right? Because everybody's got their own personal strengths. So we did this strengths finder analysis on the team, and then we kind of realized that actually we have a big gap in the team, because while we come along very well, and we understand each other, and we're very visionary, and we're very kind of talkative, and we were positive, but we kind of lacked the clear kind of strength in the team to kind of actually kind of carry out all those great ideas that we kind of invented. So that was kind of a good example of a trigger point to me, where I really understood that having data is very useful to kind of, for example, building teams. Right now, personal kind of strengths is only one angle of diversity, and there are many others, like cultural diversity, LGBT, and other things, and all these things together then strengthen each other and pile on top, right? So that personal kind of trigger point really helped me understand that we have all this data, let's use it, let's make sure we kind of build diverse team, and kind of in a sense kind of create better business, because it's a fact. We studied this extensively, and other people have studied it as well. We had a study in 2019 in our Get to Equal global study, where we kind of found out that an inclusive culture creates much more innovation, six times more innovation than a non-inclusive culture. And then if you have an inclusive culture, that will actually drive practical diversity in your team, and that then further increases innovation and psychological safety, and these all contribute to better business results.
Well, I want to follow that up with you as a managing director, and also not being part of a minority group. Like, how does that drive? Like, how can you? I get the understanding that you're able to use data to prove these things, like, for example, 6 times more productivity. But are you, what do you do? What's your role as a managing director to use this data in a better way? Like, how do you do that within Accenture?
So there's a few things, right? So I feel it's my responsibility to talk about these things, because it's simply the right thing to do, right? It's important that we have inclusion and diversity. It's good for the people in Accenture, and it's good for us to talk about it in general in the public and society, so we can drive a positive change. It's also important for me as a kind of like a majority representative to talk about these things, so I can drive home the message to all the people and kind of get them to kind of think about this and further propagate the message. And then, of course, it's good for business, which in my role I also need to drive, right? So there are many positive reasons for me to be really championing this, and I kind of think of myself as the kind of head of I&D in Accenture in Finland, even though we have a role in HR as well to do this, of course, but then I feel that I need to really be the talking head on this point.
Right. And Laura, is it, he talks about these different sorts of ways of being the head, and I think that's incredibly important for everyone who's in any executive role to be a driver, but I also wonder what it means to be successful. Sometimes companies do not see success in the same way. From your point of view with regards to data, how do companies know that they're successful in DEI?
Well, yeah. I would actually say companies don't need to think of success in the same way. when you think about being successful in D&I or DI, I like to actually encourage companies to think of it. I give the same advice as what I give to teenage girls. Okay, stop comparing yourself to others in that sense. All right, because the reality of another company, a different stage, people like to do external benchmarks and things like this. But to be honest, when you're looking at this, you have to think about progress and your outcomes relative to you as an organization, where you're starting from, what your goals are, what you need to, who you are aiming to be. So evaluating progress is an individual thing. Okay. But what I do recommend companies to do is to think about setting actual goals. And when you're looking at the data for this, your progress or your success comes from whether or not you are actually, going in the direction of that. Okay. So what you can do is set up, for instance, with one company, I was saying, okay, they wanted to internationalize and they're trying to release a product that's going out to all markets, and I was saying, okay, this is great. That's your strategy. This is what you want to do. This is your goals as a company. How do you need to be internally? What kind of skills do you need to execute on that? So what we were able to do from there is say, okay, well, we do need to have better understanding of these different markets. We need to understand the customers in these markets, the people that we're building for. That was an important thing. So they had to put diversity as an actual goal in their organization. And then they had to think about it concretely. What exactly does that mean for different kind of teams? What does diversity look like for them? What kind of skills, what kind of insight are they looking for? They actually set up actual goals. And they said, well, we should have this kind of composition in our teams. And that was a thing. They set up markers of what it looks like, to have reached that. If we have people who know about this market, that market, then that means we've made it, if we have people who know about this kind of skills and these realities, that means we've made it. So they set up their own goals and they had things you can actually mark. They set up times for it. So by this quarter, by this year, by this term, we'll be able to reach that. That's their progress. That's how they're doing that. That's not everybody's progress. People have different kinds of goals that they need. If you find that you've had inclusion issues and they're going to prioritize that, well, then your goals are going to look very different. And you're going to set them relative to your organization and with your organization to make that happen.
That brings up a really interesting thing about like organizations that are cross-country and have multiple disciplines and everything else. Heidi, I know that Futurize has companies in different countries or different divisions in different countries, and of course, different skill sets in different places. Does the data differ between the different places? And is it something that you have to tailor across the entire company for the place where you happen to be? Or are there different challenges in different kinds of places based on your experience?
Yes and no to your multifaceted questions, Steve.
I know I should ask a really, really clear question all the time, but sometimes I listen to what Laura's saying and what Thomas is saying. I'm like, well, how does that apply in real life to the way that Heidi's doing it? Because I know that over there at Futurize, you guys are using a lot of tools and things. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
So what we see is that let's say the market maturity level of DE&I is quite different in the different countries where we are present in. So for example, in Stockholm, our Stockholm colleagues are way ahead of their thinking compared to, for example, some of our colleagues in Finland. And that's not because somehow they are superior human beings. I think it's the market around Stockholm, like the companies or the organizations they have worked for before, the D&I thinking has been there on a higher level. So it's more like everyday life already for them. Whereas for us, like we still need to learn more. In terms of how much we are tailoring, so D&I is part of our company strategy. And we have goals, and what Laura mentioned sometime earlier, that it's actually the impact with what's more important than actually the looking at the goals, and that's exactly how we also see it. Like the actions that we do while trying to reach those goals are the key there, rather than actually whether we hit or not a certain number. what we have done, we have a global goals here. And then we also have, with each country, they have been able to adjust their country level goals, D&I goals. And some countries have decided to just adopt the global goals as they are. And some countries have decided that they need to adjust them so that they are more relevant for their reality. So it's both. It's both global actions that we do, one size fits all, as well as some tailored local actions.
Is it very like, because I know that there's different areas too, right? There's LGBT, there's gender issues,
Yeah.
I remember you told me one time that you were very much looking at the tech people and saying that there's very few people from very few women in the tech side and things like that. So are you also I guess what kinds of real things are you doing to make that happen, to change that? Yeah.
So we are a tech company and we are a business to business company. So whatever we do, it's like the kind of, we are building products and services for our clients and customers, who are a very diverse bunch of people. Already the numbers there are such big that even from that, there's a huge amount of diversity. So we cannot be only one kind of people or look from only one kind of perspective if we want to be able to serve those people that we're actually building the products and services for. So we need to be able to think in a diverse way. And at the same time, when we started our D&I journey, we kind of wanted to include everybody and be inclusive for all the groups. And then when this started to be more and more on the top agenda and part of the strategy, and when we were creating the D&I goals, we realized that actually we do need to make some choices. We can't try to include absolutely everybody, because then our actions don't have any focus. We need to focus on something. So we actually selected certain diversity dimensions that we are focusing on. For us at the moment, those are gender and multiculturalism, and they are because of kind of push and pull reasons. So we looked at the audit that we did, and we looked at the kind of those gaps that we have, which gave us kind of like the baseline. What do we need to fix? And then at the same time, from our strategy, we had defined certain things. Where do we want to go? What kind of workplace we want to be? And from there, that gave us the pull factors, like what kind of people we should focus on in this sense. So this is our focus right now. It doesn't mean that it's going to be like that forever. It won't. We will review it. But right now we are focusing on these groups. And already we are seeing that even though we have said that these are the groups that we are focusing on, we are also you also at the same time are being more inclusive and more attractive for those other diversity dimension groups. So even though you're focusing, you at the same time be more inclusive for everybody.
That's really important. This takes me also to Thomas and some of the things that we were talking about earlier with regards to Accenture's goals of trying to get more women involved and especially that gender being a big issue over there. But I also had the understanding that Finnish speaking was something that you had to start working with more. What do you say to clients who only want Finnish speaking consultants in the world that you're working in today?
Well, I think there's less and less of that, right? As we see this discussion, happening in the society here in Finland, this topic is kind of, on every company's table, and there is less and less of that, right? I think it was more pronounced 4 or 5 years ago, and there was, actually kind of impacting in a sense of business that you couldn't maybe hire as much as you wanted because language was a limiting thing. There's less and less of that, right? We have, most big organizations who are clients are already using, remote delivery capabilities from maybe Riga or India or Philippines or wherever in the world. Even on the government side today, right? So you're really seeing, barriers breaking. However, there are, there are still pockets where this is the case, right?
Well, does the data show that it's better for companies to have, you know, not, I'm putting it this way because I know that these companies have these criteria. They say only Finnish speakers in my team, so that they can create better communication between everybody, right? So you're saying you see that less. Does the data actually, do companies that you work with understand that more and more, or are they still working in that more traditional way? Do you have suggestions for maybe how we might change that?
So as Heidi said, it's like a journey, right? And as we have clients who still operate in that mindset, right? There's no going around that. There is kind of like a, you know, it's an understandable point of view if you kind of have a purely Finnish speaking team and you have some key members and they actually don't speak English, right? Then it's a physical obstacle, right, for moving ahead, right? Regardless of their inclusion diversity point of view. So there are like practical limitations that we will kind of to some extent always have because of educational history and these kind of things, right? So we cannot just roll over those aspects either. Like we need to be inclusive towards those people as well, right? So inclusion and diversity means that we accept everyone, right? And in some cases we just have clients who speak Finnish, fine. So then we need to, you know, speak Finnish with them, right? So, but I think the important thing is to kind of, you know, increase the awareness, right? And increase the benefits and have, you know, specific clear goals on these topics, right? Like in Accenture, we've had, you know, for many years already, very clear physical gender diversity objectives, which we are driving towards. We've said formally we're going to be 50-50. Now, the way things are progressing, you must almost say that that's a bit old-fashioned soon, right? Because that's kind of, you know, the world is evolving and that kind of the understanding of diversity is increasing. So maybe we're going to go to a 40-40-10 type of model down the road, right? So, but right now, you know, physical gender diversity is one of those practical things you can measure and set goals on, right? So that's why it's so center point today.
When it comes to things that I mean, what you're saying kind of goes along with what Bikash was saying too in the survey, is that most companies are now in this transition phase where they really don't know what to do. So one of the things I'd like to ask each of you is what kind of advice that you would have for these companies in that transition phase to get started, from your experience, both working with, you know, working as a consultant or looking at lots of different companies that have done these types of things and tried to move forward. What is the key area of advice that you would give to each of these companies? Maybe we'll start with Laura about the advice that she would give to companies as they start out in that transition phase to do more with regards to diversity and building their companies.
Yeah, I would say, to be honest, it depends on why they started this.
Right.
The big question is to figure out what made them think about this in the first place. Most of the people who come to me because they have a problem that they've recognized, and there might be something that's now become legal, or it's now become something that it is, you know, it's a PR issue or something like that. And that's something that, you know, from there you start looking at problem analysis. That's not the most sustainable way of doing it, to be honest. I want companies who are trying to start off, I want them to think about things before there is a legal or PR issue, okay? And I want you to start thinking about the reality that you have. What's the reality that you have? Start, you know, audit that. Look at that first. What is your company like now, okay? And then I want you to think about, as an organization, what do you want to be? What are your goals? Where are you trying to move as an organization? Where are you trying to develop? And this can be tied to your business. This can be tied to your culture. This can be tied to a lot of things. But your company has some goals. How can you tie it to something that is real to you? Okay. Because if you cannot make diversity, equity, or inclusion real to people, it doesn't matter your intent. It doesn't matter how good your heart is not going to work for your organization. Okay. So it has to be tied to something real. So think about your current reality, assess that in terms of where your organization is starting from, and then also think about your goals. That's going to help you get that progress, that buy-in, that build up to be able to get to where you're trying to go.
Okay, that's really important. And I think like, yeah, starting where you happen to be, I think sometimes we're afraid of that, of where we are. I mean, I've noticed in my own experience that companies don't want to admit that they have a problem until they've already fixed it. That goes for Finnish companies, and that goes for companies that are outside of Finland. Haiti, what's your advice, do you think, for people who, since you've been since Futurize has been going down this road for quite some time, what would you say is the advice that you would give to these companies who are in this transition phase of not really knowing what to do?
I think Laura really summed it perfectly. I think a few things maybe to add to that is, I think it requires a lot of courage, exactly this, like looking at where you are at right now, because most likely it's not going to be pretty. And this is not like, those like lovely balloons and bubbles and unicorns everywhere type of thing. This is like quite.
The data can be ugly.
It is, because in this case, you should find the ugly bits. Like that's kind of the point in finding out where you are. You want to find the ugly bits, not the bits like what does the majority think. You want to find the ugly bits. And the other advice that I would say is that I would start with the inclusion bit before going for the yes, do it hand in hand. But if you need to prioritize, focus on the inclusion, because otherwise you end up in what Laura was saying about those PR disasters or whatever. So I think the inclusion in a way should come first. The inclusive culture should come first.
Right. And we have this tendency to also focus very much on the problems that we have rather than the opportunity that's out there. I think it's really critical for companies to say, oh my gosh, this is a huge opportunity. I could have better business. I mean, look at what Thomas was saying before, 6 times more productivity, 6 times more business out of getting things if you actually speak to people or get people to be included. Thomas, what is your advice having to do with this? Having worked with such big companies and worked such a long time, I mean, the transition and the difference between what it was like in 1997 when you started till now has to be huge within Accenture as a whole. Having gone through that journey, what's your advice to people?
Yeah, when I started back in 97, I was sitting in a dark suit and a white shirt and a black tie and coding. So the world is quite different today. Here I sit like, this, right, which is my normal attire when I meet customers as well, right? So, so to me, it's important to start with the people, right? It's, as a CEO local, it's very important to create an inclusive workspace for everyone, right? Everyone must be able to be who they are in the work environment. That's extremely important, right? And that's where everything starts with me, right? The human aspect of things. And you need to create enablement to support that. That's training, that's kind of collecting data, that's kind of changing processes, behaviors, creating role models. So there's all kinds of practical things you can do to make sure people feel appreciated and they see role models, they see that these things are talked about, which encourages them to participate and kind of blossom, right? That's the core of it, right? Then, of course, doing this is also good for business, but that's a consequence.
And I really think that, again, I can't stress it enough. I think that when we see the opportunities, we have this great chance to actually make better business for Finland and for the companies that we're working with. I am also seeing a few questions here from the Q&A that I would like to direct towards the panel, having to do with some of these same topics. We have one question about the fact that, and actually this is directed towards Laura, but maybe towards everybody, about these invisible power networks. And the fact is that a lot of the individuals within a company who are doing the daily work, the consultants, the other people, don't feel like or have the power. How can we use the data actually to to help executives and other people see that, to resolve those things. So I'll go to Laura first on that question, just shortly. What do you think we can use the data for to help with that situation?
Yeah, that's actually the easiest way I found to get people to change. When you can show them numbers, we can show them that reality. Because people have impressions in their mind of what their organization is. Organizations are belief units, practically. People have faiths about what the organization is and who it is, and to them, it's a very hard thing to just assume or just take for granted that, oh yeah, sure, I guess maybe there's some problems. You have to actually see it. What I find, if you really want to make change, look at approaching, and you're aware there's a problem, look at finding data that is accessible. And when I say accessible in this way, I mean understandable and something that people will actually be able to take and actionalize to the audience that you're trying to talk to. Okay. So if I am talking to an organization that does not like the concept of D&I, they're slightly turned off by it. They think it's just something performative. Okay. Or I think it's not real. What you do, you look at something that they will accept. Will they look at correlations between business things, outcomes, and this? If people are saying they have a great company culture and everything is fine, and they think just talking about things is going to do something, and then you might look at things that they're more inclined to look at. Communication is a great, you can look at a lot of communication metrics, which will give you a good insight into inclusion. Look at your organizational networks in that sense. Who's being left out of communications? How are opportunities being circulated in your organization? Who's being listened to? Who's being heard? Where do the great ideas in the organization come from? Who's getting celebrated? Who's getting praised? You can look at that from a comms perspective, and that's something a lot of people are actually more inclined to respond to. So sometimes the data that you get is not just a matter of having the right data in general, it's about having the right data for your audience as well to be able to get the impact you need.
Thomas, going back to you also, you are an executive in this power structure. What advice, for other executives like yourself, what kind of advice would you give, and what kind of data are you looking at personally, and what kind of actions are you taking based on that data to make things change, for the sake of the business, if anything?
So power, if you think about power network, kind of old school boys clubs or whatever, right? So the outcome of power networks is kind of easy to measure today, right? So what we do is we measure salary increase distribution per gender, we measure promotions per gender, and we also measure when people leave Accenture and what is the gender distribution there, right? And these are all results of if you get bias here, then you have power networks you need to kind of get rid of, because then somebody would asymmetrically pick men for promotions or give more money to men, or more women leave, right? So these are the data points we look at constantly to make sure that we don't have this kind of behavior, right?
Well, and I think that's really solid. I'm going to take the last question here, and I'm going to give it to Heidi, and I'm going to ask her a question about whether Thomas and other 40-year-old white men should be afraid of DEI.
No, I don't think. Well, I don't think Thomas is afraid, but I think other whatever age, whatever gender, but now you said 40-year-old men, I don't think they should be afraid. I think actually they are needed here. I think they are needed to make this change. I think this change cannot be made by those groups who need the change by them alone. I think that those who hold the power today are needed to make this change.
Yeah, and I think in the bottom line, one of the things that we've all learned, that this means diversity and inclusion, and that means everybody. That doesn't mean excluding the people who currently are the majority in any kind of way. It means making everybody a part of it. And I'm really actually quite proud looking at this screen of the diversity that we have today in this group where we sometimes have people who are left out, including white men and people who have gender differences and stuff. We don't have anybody who has of that background today, but we cannot forget any of the groups that are out there, and that's how we make better products and do better for the companies that are out there. It is 10 o'clock, and I really, really appreciate everybody who participated, and I'm sorry that we could not get to all the questions that are out there. I do hope that that everybody got a little bit out of today's questions, and we are all available on LinkedIn and other places. So please do send a shout out, or if you're part of Inklusiiv, I'm really proud to have started my board membership on Inklusiiv now. So that is something that is exciting me for the next couple of years, that we will hopefully make some big changes and have an exciting time. But I want to thank everyone who has joined the panel today, and each of you has some great insight on how we use data, and hopefully everyone got a good chance to get something out of this. I don't know if Bikash wants to close the session.
Yeah, I could share some words.
The floor is yours. Thank you very much, everyone.
All right, and that's it. Thank you so much, everyone in the audience, for such an engaging discussion, and also our amazing panelists for the interesting insights. We have already shared the key findings of the survey, plus the full report on the Inklusiiv media as a form of blog post. A link is also shared already on the chat box, so please feel free to check the blog out. We have also shared the feedback form on the chat box. Please fill it up because we would love to receive your feedback to further improve, our content in the future. Thank you once again from everyone here at Inklusiiv. Have a lovely rest of the day, and hope to see you all in the future events. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.